The village of Kimbila rested quietly on the edge of the vast savanna, its golden grasses stretching endlessly beneath a fiery sun. Each path that twisted through the village carried whispers of ancestors, their voices said to linger in the wind that danced between the baobab trees. The villagers, bound to the land by tradition and survival, worked tirelessly, their lives woven into the rhythms of nature. The land provided, but only as much as it chose, and its people understood that they were at its mercy. In this serene yet fragile balance stood Mukasa, the landlord who wielded power like a blade. His wealth came not from the sweat of his own brow, but from the toils of the villagers who rented his land. Mukasa was tall and imposing, his presence like the shadow of a storm cloud. His family had controlled Kimbila's lands for generations, and Mukasa carried their legacy of exploitation with pride. "Respect me," he would say, "for it is through my kindness that you have roofs over your heads." But the villagers knew his kindness was nothing more than a leash, and they lived in fear of the day it might tighten. Among them was Ayo, a farmer whose quiet strength set him apart. While others bowed their heads to Mukasa, Ayo stood tall, though he never spoke out of turn. His hands, roughened by years of tilling the soil, were a testament to his dedication to his family. He was a man of few words, but his actions spoke volumes. Each morning he would rise before the sun, his heart heavy with hope and despair, knowing the land could either bless or betray him. But the drought came, and with it, hope dried up. The rains that once nourished the fields became a distant memory, leaving the earth cracked and lifeless. The villagers watched helplessly as their crops withered under the unrelenting sun. Waterholes turned to dust, and the cattle grew thin. Hunger was a shadow that loomed over every home in Kimbila, its claws digging deeper with each passing day. Mukasa did not see the drought as a time for compassion. Instead, he seized the opportunity to tighten his grip. His guards, dressed in red sashes that marked their allegiance, marched through the village, their voices echoing with cruel declarations. Those who cannot pay their rent by the end of the week will leave their homes. There will be no mercy. At the center of his modest hut, Ayo sat in silence, his wife Zuri pacing beside him. "How will we pay him?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "The fields are barren, Ayo. The children. What will we do?" Her words hung in the air, heavy with despair. Ayo's gaze was steady, though his heart ached. "I will not let us lose our home," he said simply, his voice firm. His youngest daughter clung to his arm, her wide eyes searching his face for reassurance. That night, Ayo sought counsel from his elder brother Kamau, whose wisdom was often sought by the villagers. Kamau's home, adorned with charms and carvings from the ancestors, felt like a sanctuary. "Mukasa's family has ruled for generations," Kamau said, his voice low. "Those who challenged them were crushed. The stories are not just warnings, Ayo. They are truths." "I understand the danger," Ayo replied. "But I cannot stand by and watch my family suffer." Kamau sighed deeply, placing a hand on Ayo's shoulder. "If you choose this path, tread carefully, brother. Mukasa's power does not end with the land. It reaches into the hearts of men." When Ayo returned home, he found Zuri sitting by the fire, her face illuminated by its flickering light. "Ayo," she began softly, "do not let your pride lead us into ruin. The children, they need their father." Her voice broke, and she lowered her head. Ayo knelt beside her, his hand resting on hers. "This is not pride, Zuri," he said. "This is love. I will not let fear dictate our lives." As the fire crackled between them, Ayo turned his gaze to his children, who had fallen asleep, their faces peaceful despite the turmoil around them. In their innocence, he found his resolve. The dawn came swiftly, and with it, Ayo rose to face the burden ahead. Ayo lay on the straw mat in his hut, staring at the wooden beams above as if they held the answers to his unspoken questions. The night air was heavy, the silence broken only by the distant rustle of dry leaves swept by the wind. Zuri, asleep beside him, shifted uneasily, her face etched with worry even in rest. Ayo's thoughts churned, Mukasa's words replaying in his mind. Pay by week's end, or leave with nothing. The weight of his family's survival pressed against his chest. Fear clawed at the edges of his resolve. But within that fear burned a flicker of something stronger. Justice. His ancestors' spirit seemed to whisper through the walls, urging him to act. He sat up, his fists tightening as he muttered to himself, "If I do nothing, I have already lost." With that, he made his decision. Word of Ayo's intent spread quickly through the village like a brush fire. Women washing clothes by the river spoke in hushed tones. Men sharpening tools under the shade of the baobab shook their heads. "Brave, but foolish," said one elder. "Does he not know what happened to those who stood against Mukasa before?" Another villager, a younger man, disagreed. "At least Ayo has the courage to act. He may be the hope we need." At the village square, where elders gathered on woven mats to discuss the day's events, the news was met with concern. Elder Jabari, his face weathered like the bark of an ancient tree, raised his voice. "The boy's heart is strong, but he risks not just his family but all of us. Mukasa is not one to be challenged lightly." "But if no one challenges him, what will become of Kimbila?" asked a woman from the crowd, her voice trembling with both fear and hope. The elders exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of past sacrifices heavy in their silence. The sun rose high as Ayo walked the dusty path toward Mukasa's estate. Each step felt like a test, the road stretching endlessly before him. On either side of the path, the fields lay barren, their cracked soil a stark reminder of the drought's cruelty. Ahead, the gates to Mukasa's estate loomed, carved with symbols of power, lions, spears, and the sun. 2 guards flanked the entrance, their expressions as cold as the iron weapons they held. Ayo took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Where are you here, farmer?" one guard barked. "To speak with Mukasa," Ayo replied, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. The guards exchanged a look before one gestured for him to enter. The courtyard was a spectacle of wealth. Stone fountains trickling water, lush plants that defied the drought, and statues of Mukasa's ancestors, their faces carved with expressions of triumph. Ayo felt the weight of the place, but kept his gaze forward. Inside the hall, Mukasa sat on a throne carved from ebony, his robes shimmering like the scales of a river fish. He eyed Ayo with a mix of amusement and disdain. "Ayo," he said, drawing out the name. "The farmer who dares to disturb my peace. What brings you here?" Ayo stepped forward, his shoulders squared. "I come to ask for leniency, Mukasa. The drought has taken everything. I cannot pay what I do not have." Mukasa laughed, the sound echoing off the walls. "Leniency? Do you mistake me for a charity? He leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. The land you till is mine. If you cannot pay, you have no place here. Ayo's jaw tightened, but he held his ground. You speak of ownership, yet this land belongs to more than one man. It is the life of the village, the legacy of our people. Mukasa's laughter faded, replaced by a sneer. Legacy? Do not speak of what you do not understand. My family has ruled this land for generations. He paused, then added with a smirk. Of course, some might say it was not always so. His words hung in the air, a cryptic taunt that stirred something deep within Ayo. Disturbed by Mukasa's remark, Ayo sought out Nia, the village griot. Her hut, adorned with beads and charms, was a sanctuary of stories, the walls painted with symbols of Kimbila's past. Nia greeted him with a knowing look. You carry questions, Ayo. Speak them. Mukasa mentioned something about the land, Ayo began. Something that makes me think there is more to his rule than we know. Nia nodded, her voice taking on the cadence of a storyteller. Long ago, before Mukasa's family claimed this land, it belonged to your forebears. They were tricked, Ayo, tricked into signing away their rights through lies and betrayal. The stories say they wept as the ink dried, their tears mixing with the soil. Long before Mukasa's family claimed this land, their tears mixing with the soil, stroked the earth, claimed the land, and perhaps bestowed the lesson of life. Ayo's chest tightened. So, it was never truly his. No, Nia said, her voice firm. The land remembers its rightful guardians. That night, under the cover of darkness, Ayo met with Desta, the herbalist, and Omari, a fiery young man known for his boldness. By the dim light of an oil lamp, Ayo shared what he had learned. We cannot do this alone, Ayo said. Mukasa's power comes from the silence of the people. If we speak together, we can break it. Desta placed a hand on his arm. The land has chosen you, Ayo. We will stand with you. Omari's eyes blazed. Let Mukasa try to silence us. He will see what Kimbila's people are made of. The three of them worked late into the night, devising a plan to gather evidence and allies. They knew the path ahead was fraught with danger, but for the first time in years, the air in Kimbila felt alive with possibility. Mukasa, ever watchful, sensed the undercurrents of unrest. His guards patrolled the village more frequently, their presence a constant reminder of his reach. Bribes found their way into the hands of those who might resist him, and whispers of threats spread like wildfire. Yet in the face of his tightening grip, Ayo's resolve only grew. He walked through the village, seeing the hunger in the eyes of children, the despair in the stooped shoulders of elders. He thought of his ancestors, of their tears in the soil, and he vowed silently, "The land will remember, and so will we." The word traveled quickly through Kimbila. Ayo had called for a gathering beneath the ancient baobab tree, the village's sacred heart, where elders passed wisdom and decisions shaped futures. The villagers, unsure of what lay ahead, prepared themselves. Some came with hope lighting their eyes, others with fear casting shadows over their steps. The air was thick with anticipation as families gathered under the tree's vast canopy, its roots sprawling like the history of their people. Mukasa arrived as if he were a king, his guards flanking him, their spears gleaming under the sun. He wore a robe embroidered with golden threads, and his every movement radiated arrogance. His presence silenced the crowd, their murmurs fading into uneasy quiet. Mukasa smirked, surveying the faces around him. "What is the meaning of this?" he demanded, his voice sharp. "Who dares summon the people without my command?" Ayo stepped forward, his frame small compared to Mukasa's imposing presence, yet there was strength in his stance. "It is not your command we follow, Mukasa. It is the call of truth." The villagers murmured at his boldness, their eyes darting between the two men. Ayo's voice rose, steady and strong, cutting through the tension. "We have lived under your rule for many years, Mukasa. We have toiled on this land, not for ourselves, but for you. We have endured your demands, even when the earth gave us nothing." He paused, looking at the faces of his neighbors, drawing courage from their silent support. "But this land is not yours to claim," Mukasa sneered. "Not mine? Do you forget who built this estate? Who ensured you have homes and fields to work? Without me, there is no Kimbila." Ayo shook his head. "Without the people, there is no Kimbila. This land belongs to us, Mukasa, to our ancestors who tilled it long before your family arrived with their lies and greed." He gestured toward the crowd. "We all know the stories. We have heard them from the griot, from our elders. This land carries our blood and our tears. You may hold it now, but it does not belong to you." The villagers began to stir, whispers rippling through the crowd. Hope flickered in their hearts, fanned by Ayo's words. Mukasa laughed, the sound hollow and sharp. "Stories," he said dismissively. "Children's tales meant to entertain around the fire. You dare use these against me? I am the protector of this land, the one who provides for you all. And you, Ayo, are a fool trying to incite rebellion with nonsense." But his confidence faltered when a figure stepped forward from the crowd. It was Nia, the griot, her beaded necklace clinking softly as she moved. The air grew still as her voice rose, melodic and haunting. She began to sing. "Once the earth was free, and the rivers sang. The land bore fruit for all who labored. But the serpent came with a silver tongue, and the rightful hands were emptied." Her words hung in the air like smoke, and the villagers listened, their memories stirred. Nia's voice swelled as she wove the tale of betrayal, how Mukasa's ancestors had tricked the original custodians of the land, taking it through deceit. Her song was both a lament and a call to action, stirring the hearts of all who heard it. When she finished, the silence was deafening. Mukasa shifted uneasily, the weight of the truth pressing against his carefully constructed lies. Mukasa, desperate to regain control, reached into his robes and pulled out a yellowed document. "Here," he bellowed, holding it high, "this is proof of my family's ownership. This land is mine, by law and by history." The crowd wavered, uncertain. But then Desta, the village herbalist, stepped forward. Her hands, steady and practiced from years of tending to wounds, reached for the document. "Let me see," she said, her voice calm but firm. Mukasa hesitated, but he had no choice. Desta examined the paper, her sharp eyes catching the faint inconsistencies in the ink and the seals. She turned to the crowd and spoke with quiet conviction. "This document is a lie. The symbols do not match the marks of our elders. The ink is too new to be as old as Mukasa claims. He has forged this." The villagers erupted, their anger boiling over. Mukasa's face drained of color as he realized his deceit had been exposed. "Lies!" he shouted. "She knows nothing." But the crowd no longer listened to him. Their voices rose in unity, a wave of defiance and righteousness that swept through the square. Mukasa tried to retreat, his guards moving to protect him, but even they hesitated. One by one, the guards stepped aside, their loyalty to Mukasa crumbling in the face of the villagers' fury. Mukasa, seeing no escape, fell to his knees. His once proud posture was gone, replaced by the desperation of a man who had lost everything. The villagers surrounded him, but Ayo raised his hand for silence. "We are not like you, Mukasa," he said. "We will not rule with fear or greed. This land will return to its rightful owners, the people of Kimbila." The villagers, empowered by Ayo's courage and Nia's song, declared the land their own. Under the baobab tree, they vowed to protect it for future generations. The elders spoke of the importance of unity, and the griot promised to immortalize the day in her songs. Ayo stood quietly among them, his heart heavy but full. He had fought not just for his family, but for the dignity of an entire village. As the sun set over Kimbila, its rays casting golden light over the baobab's leaves, the people began to rebuild, not just their land, but their spirit. Beneath the sprawling branches of the baobab tree, the elders of Kimbila gathered. The tree stood as it always had, its roots winding deep into the earth, a silent witness to generations of triumphs and trials. Villagers formed a respectful circle around the elders, waiting for their wisdom to guide the community's next steps. The air was thick with both relief and anticipation. Elder Jabari, his voice steady and full of gravitas, spoke first. "Today, the chains of deceit have been broken. Mukasa's power is no more, but we must now decide what becomes of the land." Another elder, Nya, who had seen many seasons come and go, added, "The land must never again fall into the hands of a single man. It belongs to the people. That is how it was, and that is how it shall be." The murmurs of agreement from the crowd grew louder. The decision was unanimous. The land would be communal, its bounty shared among all who toiled upon it. "Let this day mark the return of fairness to Kimbila," Elder Jabari declared, his voice carrying the weight of generations. "The land is free." When the announcement was made, the villagers erupted into cheers. They turned to Ayo, their faces glowing with gratitude. Ayo stood humbly among them, his hands clasped in front of him. The people hailed him as a hero, but Ayo raised his hand to quiet them. "This victory," Ayo said, his voice calm yet firm, "does not belong to me alone. It belongs to all of us. I could not have stood against Mukasa without the strength of your unity. It was the griot's truth, Desta's wisdom, and the courage of every one of you that broke the chains of his deceit. Together, we reclaimed what was ours." The villagers, inspired by his humility, nodded in agreement. "Ayo is right," one man said. "Our unity is our strength. We must never forget it." Al-Manah, Mukasa, now stripped of his wealth and authority, sat alone at the edge of the village. His once proud posture had wilted, his robes now plain and worn. The elders approached him with somber expressions, their decision already made. "Mukasa," Elder Jabari said, his tone neither cruel nor kind, "you have betrayed this village and its people. Your greed has brought suffering to many." Mukasa looked up, his eyes hollow. "I was only doing what my family taught me," he muttered. I did what I thought was my right. Nya stepped forward, her gaze piercing. A right built on lies is no right at all, but we will not cast you into the darkness of vengeance. The ancestors teach us that mercy tempers justice. Jabari nodded. You are exiled, Mukasa. You will leave Kimbila and never return. This is not for your sake, but for ours. We choose to build a future free of hatred. Mukasa lowered his head. His once commanding presence was gone, replaced by the weight of his downfall. As he walked away from the village, the people watched in silence. His departure was not celebrated, but it served as a lesson. Greed consumes, and power built on deceit will crumble. That evening, Ayo returned to his home. His wife, Zuri, stood at the doorway, their children clinging to her sides. Her face, once lined with worry, now carried a soft smile. Ayo embraced her, his shoulders finally relaxing for the first time in weeks. You've done something remarkable, Zuri whispered. Not just for us, but for the whole village. Ayo shook his head gently. We did it together, Zuri. I couldn't have stood without your strength. He knelt, pulling his children close. Remember this, my little ones, he said softly. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to act in the face of it. Our land, our lives, they are worth fighting for. His words hung in the air like a blessing, filling their small home with a renewed sense of purpose. As the village celebrated its newfound freedom, Nia, the griot, began to sing. Her voice rose like the evening breeze, carrying the story of Ayo and the people of Kimbila. She sang of betrayal and courage, of unity and justice. Her words wove the events of the past weeks into a tapestry of lessons for future generations. Let the land remember the hands that tilled its soil, the truth that broke its chains. For justice does not sleep, and unity bends the arc of fate. The villagers joined in, their voices merging with hers, echoing through the night. The song, filled with hope and wisdom, became a part of Kimbila's oral tradition. Children would hear it, and their children after them, ensuring the story lived on. In the quiet that followed, the village seemed to exhale as one. The baobab's leaves rustled softly, as though the ancestors themselves were pleased. Ayo stood in the midst of his people, not as a hero, but as a man who had reminded them of their strength. And so, Kimbila began to heal, its spirit rekindled by the enduring power of truth and unity. The elders of Kimbila sat in a semicircle beneath the shade of the great baobab tree, their faces etched with concern and contemplation. The tree, revered as a symbol of wisdom, seemed to listen silently as they debated the village's future. Elder Jabari spoke first, his voice deep and measured. For generations, we have held to the ways of our ancestors. But Mukasa's greed has brought ruin to our traditions. The land has suffered, and so have our people. Nya, the eldest among them, nodded slowly. The young ones look to us for guidance. Shall we teach them to bow to corruption, or to stand for what is right? Mukasa's rule was a poison that spread because we allowed it. Ayo has shown us that we cannot let fear silence us. But change is dangerous, countered Elder Biko. Mukasa may be gone, but what of those who seek to follow in his footsteps? Tradition anchors us. If we stray too far, we risk losing who we are. Jabari turned to the crowd gathered around them. Tradition does not mean we accept oppression. Our ancestors fought for this land. We must honor their memory by protecting it, not by letting one man's greed consume it. The villagers murmured their agreement, the tension in the air softening as unity began to take hold. The decision was made. Kimbila would reclaim its dignity by preserving the land as a gift for all, shared and protected by the people. The fall of Mukasa marked a turning point in Kimbila's history. The man who once stood tall, lording over the village, now walked alone along the dusty path, exiled and broken. The villagers watched his departure in silence. There was no joy in his downfall, only the solemn recognition that justice had been served. Ao stood at the edge of the crowd, his expression unreadable. Zuri stepped beside him, whispering, "Do you feel relief?" "I feel the weight of what comes next," Ayo replied. But justice was needed. The land belongs to the people again. For the first time in years, the villagers walked the fields without fear. The air seemed lighter, the land itself breathing in relief. Mukasa's exile was more than a punishment. It was a reminder that no man's power could last if it was built on lies. The elders, in their wisdom, chose mercy over revenge. Mukasa could have faced a harsher fate, but they believed in a greater lesson. Elder Nya spoke to the villagers as they gathered by the baobab tree once more. "Our ancestors teach us that justice must be tempered with wisdom," she said. "Mukasa has lost his power, but we will not stain our hands with hatred. Let him carry the weight of his actions as he walks this earth. This is how we heal, not by vengeance, but by choosing a better path." The decision resonated deeply with the villagers, who nodded in agreement. Mercy, they realized, was not a weakness, but a strength. A reminder that even in anger, one could choose compassion. In the days that followed, Kimbila transformed. The people, once bound by fear, found strength in one another. They worked together to rebuild what had been lost, their hands sowing seeds, not just in the soil, but in their collective hope. "Ao," a young boy called out one afternoon as the villagers worked the fields. "How did you find the courage to stand up to Mukasa?" Ao paused, wiping sweat from his brow. "Courage does not mean you do not fear, little one. It means you act despite your fear, because you believe in what is right." The boy nodded solemnly, his small hands gripping a farming tool. "I want to be like you when I grow up." "You must be better," Ayo said with a smile. "This land will need strong hands and wise hearts." At sunset, the griot. Nia took her place beneath the baobab tree, her kora in hand. The villagers gathered, their voices quiet with anticipation. Nia began to play, her fingers weaving a melody as ancient as the tree itself. Her voice rose, steady and clear, carrying the story of Kimbila's journey. In the shadow of greed, a voice arose, steady and strong. The land remembered its people, and the people found their unity. Her song captured the struggle, the defiance, and the ultimate triumph of justice over corruption. The villagers joined in, their voices rising together as one, ensuring the story would never be forgotten. As the last notes faded into the night, Eho stood among them, not as a hero, but as a man who had reminded his people of their strength. The baobab's leaves rustled in the breeze, as if the ancestors themselves were pleased. Kimbila's spirit had been restored, and with it, the promise of a brighter